Hello, I'm Martha Engber, host of Vigilant Positivity, a blog and podcast meant to decrease depolarization by uniting Americans through civil discussion that leads to common ground. Thanks to those of you who've made it so successful. Please feel free to subscribe and grow the Common Ground movement. Every month, I try to do a citizen spotlight to cast a light on other Americans on both sides of the political spectrum who are working hard to decrease polarization. Today, I'm talking with Wilk Wilkinson. Hello, Wilk.
Hello, Martha. How are you?
Very good, thank you. Wilk's journey from adversity to success in his career, marriage, and parenting exemplifies the transformative power of perseverance and self-improvement. As the new Director of Media Systems and Operations at Braver Angels, America's largest cross-partisan grassroots movement working to bridge political and social divides, Wilk plays a pivotal role in shaping national dialogue through conversations, storytelling, and strategic media. His podcast, Derate the Hate, complements this mission by offering practical tools and authentic conversations that inspire personal growth and civil engagement. I'm a member of Braver Angels and was really excited to hear about your new role as the Director of Media Systems and Operations. Can you tell us more about what it means to shape national dialogue through conversations, storytelling, and strategic media?
Sure. Yeah. Thank you, Martha. And yeah. So I would say this about that. A big part of the national conversation right now is the part that isn't happening, and we we too often, when it comes to these contentious topics, in this day and age where we are more connected than we've ever been, when you think in terms of just people's ability to, they've always got a phone in their pocket, they can jump on Zoom and talk to anybody, but we are more alone than we have been in a long time. We've lost our ability, or let's just say many of us have lost our ability to really have the conversations that need to be happening, um, for whatever reason. I mean, there's any multitude of reasons. And shaping that conversation is so incredibly important. And how do we bring people together to have contentious or have non-contentious conversations about contentious issues? And it is important because I think a lot of people right now, Martha, are just very frustrated that nothing seems to get done. We don't seem to be able to work through our differences the way that we used to, and it's it's organizations like us at Braver Angels that are showing people how to do that again. How can we come to common ground to find solutions to common cause problems that we have, when we don't have the conversation? We have to be able to have that conversation. So shaping that conversation is incredibly important. And then, using strategic media and things like that. A lot of what we see online today, again, being in uh, the most connected time in human history, we see a lot of just ugliness online, and the media that we do see is shaped in a way, especially when it comes to social media and mainstream media. That stuff is shaped in a way to keep us either scared, angry, or focused on our perceived or real grievances. I call that fog. I think it's important that we try to show people that there's a better way to engage. There's better media that they can consume to come to better answers, and ultimately come away feeling better about things at the end of the day than just scared, mad, or aggrieved.
And those would be through, so essentially addressing through social media, for example, through newsletters. What modes of media are you aiming for?
I would say all of the above. I mean, there has to be a multi-front strategy in how we go about doing things. So when we're talking about Braver Angels specifically, right? We have uh, we have a number of different mission aligned podcasts that that we will be promoting soon in a broader media network. We've got YouTube, which people can go to the Braver Angels YouTube channel to um, any number of different things, whether it be a local debate that took place, or different media clips from different things that we've done, or conversations that were had, things like that. And then obviously there's our newsletters as well. There's newsletters that come out weekly, and then different alliances throughout the country have their own, site specific, or maybe state specific or alliance specific newsletters. So there's a lot of ways, Martha, that our information is getting out there. I would just strongly encourage anybody who, and then social media too. I'm sorry I failed to address that one. Social media as well. I mean, a big part of our strategy going forward would be to say, hey, if you are on social media, whether it be Twitter, or Facebook, or YouTube, or Instagram, and X, things like that. Um, Please engage with the content that we're putting out there. If you see somebody that tags, Braver Angels in a particular thing, and that thing happens to strike you in some way as being positive, and it should, if Braver Angels is tagged in it, then please share that content, interact with that content. Share it with your sphere of influence, because that's the best way that we can spread our message of positivity and social cohesion, is to engage with the content that's being put out there by or with Braver Angels.
Well, I was talking recently with Swati Srivastava, and she is the Braver Angels member and also the director of media for Crossing Party Lines. For those of you who don't know, that's another national depolarization organization. And she mentioned exactly that the currently in America, we're receiving this barrage of negative messaging that claims those who don't hold our viewpoints are the enemy. She
Hmm.
said that those of us who are determined to unite Americans, if we want to change that phenomenon, we have to create a new story. What story would you like to tell Americans that would convince them to give up their fog, which, of course, you have mentioned is a new acronym for fear, outrage, and grievance. After all, those emotions are much stronger and easier to access than generosity and kindness.
Yeah, Swati is absolutely wonderful. She's putting out great content, and she's absolutely right. There has to be a better story, and the stories that we need to tell, Martha, are those stories of people who say, "Hey, you know, I had I had been in this place. I had been in a bad place where maybe I couldn't talk to my brother or my sister-in-law or my mother-in-law or whatever, or I lost my friend from childhood. We'd been friends forever, and then politics drove a wedge in between us. But I came to Braver Angels, and I saw that there is real possibility in the right kind of conversation, a structured conversation. Those are the stories that we need to tell, because it's heartbreaking when uh, we hear of people who have lost their ability to have Thanksgiving dinner with a particular relative because politics has now gotten in the way, or when we hear the story of how a marriage was dissolved because of a particular political thing, or different societal divides and different neighborhoods and different things within our country that people have just lost their ability to work through. Those stories can be remedied. We can work through those things. And the power of storytelling is huge,
Mm.
because rather than using uh pulling at people's heartstrings and making them feel bad about whatever, we've all heard the concept, if it bleeds it leads. We don't often see the real feel good things in the media that people need to see and need to understand. We see these always the doom and the gloom and the ugliness that's happening in certain parts of our society. And when that is all we see all the time, we begin to believe that that's all that there is. But that is not all that there is. There is so much more out there. There is that ability to work through difficult situations, difficult conversations. Navigating difficult conversations is one of the many beautiful workshops that Braver Angels has. Navigating difficult conversations, depolarization, or depolarizing within those different things. But when we start to tell the stories of people who are positively impacted by the work that we do at Braver Angels, it's hugely important. It's hugely important because it shows people. It takes away a little bit of that hopelessness. People feel People often feel that they've lost their agency. They feel powerless to affect change. But I'm here to tell you, Martha, that they don't have to be powerless to affect change. They can affect change. They can affect it by a very little bit if they've got a small circle of influence. They can affect it a lot of it if they've got a big circle of influence. But the reality is they are not powerless. They can affect change.
Well, videos are absolutely very convincing and people watch them. So what you're saying is that you may start featuring these people and telling their stories in that way, which I, of course, have not seen before. Is that correct?
Yeah, I would like to. I mean, that is definitely a part of it, and that's one of the things that I do on the Derate the Hate podcast is I have conversations with people on any number of things. There's definitely stories about trauma to triumph, right, and adversity to awesomeness, and we try to highlight those kind of stories. But yeah, there's definitely other things. When you watch for instance, a Braver Angels debate, which isn't necessarily a debate in terms of what a lot of people think of when it comes to a debate. But when you watch a Braver Angels debate, whether it's an in-person event or something online, and you see, somebody really start to internalize the way that others believe or came to believe what they believe on a particular issue, and start to see that okay, this is not about just fighting and listening with the intent to respond, but to understand how the other side has come to believe a certain thing. That is one of those triumphs, right? That is one of those stories that people can look at and say, wow, active listening and active listening skills can be the difference in learning something and getting something done. A big part of the Braver Angels way is we're all here to learn, and we're not here to just um, uh, fight with people with whom we disagree, because it's not that we're uh, you know the reality is we all have our blind spots. This is the point that I'm trying to make here with the whole storytelling and the narrative behind how we can use media to shape our different perspectives, right? Is when we come across somebody who thinks differently than we do, and we understand that we have our blind spots, they have our blind spots, but that does not mean that we're not worth, talking to. It's not a situation where that conversation isn't worth having. And we start to learn from each other because we listen to each other. I think that's a huge part of what we need to do with our media is to show people that if we're actually listening and learning how people came to believe what they believe, we have a lot easier time understanding how people that are very different from us in their beliefs got there and how we can move forward after that.
If you put out a call to Braver Angels members, for example, to say, would you be willing to share your personal story of how you've changed since you started to work on depolarization, and perhaps pair up with somebody with whom you disagree but now agree? What kind of a response do you think you'd get?
Oh, I think there's thousands of stories like that, Martha. It's throughout the country, and yeah, I definitely think that that one of the big things that you're going to see in this new, like I just recently stepped into this role, so there's a lot of ideas being tossed around as to what we can do and how we can better use media to tell that braver angel story. That's been one of those things that we've talked about, and we're working on a plan on what that might look like, is to start sharing those stories, sharing those braver angels wins, right? Showing people who came to this maybe very skeptical, not believing that big things could happen, but now have built a friend, built a friendship and a bond with somebody who they still very well could disagree with, but they're actually able to talk about those disagreements now in a non-contentious way. That's just one of the many things that I think you're going to start to see out of the Braver Angels media is how we can highlight those wins and tell those stories and show the world that, hey, just because we disagree, just because we have our blind spots, doesn't mean we're not worth talking to.
So using the Braver Angels members as a rich asset of material and stories, and which I think is very interesting. And along those lines, even I was thinking before we met, I'm like, well, are you going to have a slogan contest for, for Braver Angels members about how to convey a message to the world? So are you going to be using the Braver Angels members and wealth of, I guess, knowledge more than you have, I guess?
Yeah, that's absolute. Yeah, that is one of the things that is definitely going to be happening. Martha is one of the big things that under our new CEO, Mari Giles. One of the big things that we're going to be focusing on a lot more is our different alliances in different areas, and in all areas, and building more of these alliances. And for people who may not be familiar, an alliance is a particular group in a particular geographical area. They've got co-chairs, well, one on the maybe the blue side, one on the red side. So it's a balanced co-chair situation. But I want to go back to a word that you just used there a couple minutes ago, Martha, is the word asset, and how our members, how our people are our greatest asset. That is an absolute. The people that built this, that's, grassroots organization, people are our members are our greatest assets. And yeah, we're going to be leaning heavily on the people that make up Braver Angels to because there's a very small amount of us on staff. It's just it's this organization is huge, and it's just plentiful with beautiful stories of people that have come together and crossed those partisan lines, bridged that gap, and learned to have those conversations. So yes, our members are our greatest asset, and those stories are the ones that we are going to be highlighting so that we can show everybody else, what is possible with these structured conversations, with our workshops, with our educational materials. What can we do? We can do a lot, and it starts with each of us as individuals out there that make up we the people.
Even if Braver Angels does manage to come up with a pithy message, for example, to convey to those outside of the organization and to greater America, the organization is one of, and you touched upon this, is one of 400 such very organizations of varying sizes that are working on depolarization, civil discussion, and positive action to strengthen democracy. Through your role as media director, do you see an opportunity to unite Braver Angels messaging with those of other organizations to create a much bigger, more unified, and positive message that Americans can get a hold of?
I would say that nothing is off the table in what we can do. There are a lot of great organizations out there doing great work in the bridge building space. There's any number of them that do things that are very mission aligned with what Braver Angels does and does it in different ways. So I would say that there's probably there's nothing off the table as far as what we can do. And then when we start to start thinking about strategic partnerships and things like that. I would say that is going to be largely on the vision that our CEO Mari Giles sees that as. But yeah, I think in any way that we are looking at strategic coalition partnerships and things, media will be a big part of that.
Well, to get any sort of message heard, whether it's just simply the Braver Angels or as in more united with in partnership with other organizations, um, how do you plan to cut through the massively well-funded negative messaging put out by conflict entrepreneurs, who purposely divide Americans for their own benefit, i.e., politicians, political parties, hostile foreign nations, and billionaires? After all, most common ground organizations, for example, are, as you mentioned, like Braver Angels. They're volunteer-led and operate on small budgets.
Yeah, and that's the $1 million question, right? No pun intended. It's they are very well funded because they are effective. The outrage entrepreneurs, or as Amanda Ripley calls them, the conflict entrepreneurs, they let's face it, conflict sells soap. That fear, outrage, and grievance model is proven to produce profits, and it's very sad that people have put profits over people in that terms. I'm somebody who loves profits. Um, Strong capitalist conservative in nature, but that is an industry that is just painful to watch and see how so many people have become quite wealthy and powerful through the power of conflict. And so we as organizations that are trying to battle that that narrative, right? That ugliness that the outrage entrepreneurs and grievance grifters are pushing constantly, do have a strong um, uh, a big a hard fought battle ahead of us. We do have a hard fought battle ahead of us because you're right. We don't have nearly the budget. We our The thing that we're putting out there is much better for the people, but it doesn't produce the kind of profits that that outrage and fear does. So it's going to be tough, but the value is in the message. By showing people that we are much better together than we are divided, we can accomplish so much more as a cohesive unit than as a bunch of people who are either just completely out for you know number one and nobody else, or in our particular silos and our particular tribes. We have to appeal to the nature of our better angels, let's just say, right? We have to make people understand and show people that we are so much stronger together. And and eventually it is my hope and it is my life's mission to show people that we are better together. There is a better way to engage. And while there will always be forces that would rather see us separated and at each other's throats, um, we have to again appeal to the nature of our better angels and come together and work through our differences so that we might flourish better as a nation and as a human race.
Do you feel a sense of urgency for getting such message out into the world?
Absolutely. Yeah, urgency is this is of the utmost urgency because Again, I'll go back to something I said earlier, Martha. We are in the most connected age that we've ever been in, but yet people feel, on the whole, more lonely than they've probably ever been. Those two things are horrible, and it's an exponential thing. As we become more connected, people are there's a huge causal effect there. As we become more connected, people become more alone. And that's not going to slow down unless we as humans, through real human connection, slow it down. And it's our responsibility to do so. There's a huge urgency there because, excuse me, as we go grow further apart and don't allow ourselves to work together on these things, that loneliness and that lack of agency will eventually turn into something much uglier when we think in terms of violence and different forms of aggression. So yeah, there's an absolute urgency there, and we have to understand that urgency and take that into full account when we're when we choose what we consume, when we choose what we say, when we choose what we do.
Before joining Braver Angels, I too was a person who would get extremely anxious about political news. And when I joined Braver Angels and started to get involved, I felt an immense sense of relief and um, that I could make a difference and I could sleep at night. But what's surprising to me, even if I tell people that they somehow don't believe it and they continue to live with anxiety.
Hmm.
So I say, well, I used to be anxious and I did something that now makes me not anxious. And yet that doesn't seem to be a convincing enough message for them. So what might you do to combat that disbelief that things can be better?
Yeah, well, there's always going to be your skeptics and your cynics, and that is a tough it's a tough wall to climb, right? Because uh, people, uh, people, I think, I mean, there's a couple different things that we can think about there, but a lot of them really come back to the basic human needs we seem to be missing. And a lot of people have lost, well, I'll go back to the word I said urgent, before, agency. They feel powerless in their ability to affect change. And the more powerless people feel, and the more lonely people feel, they become depressed, they become angry. Sometimes it's a combination of the two. And the more depressed and angry people become, the more anxiety ridden people become, like you had mentioned, Martha, the more cynical they become to the idea that things can really happen. We can really affect that change. We can make a difference in the way that we are going forward. Um, it is really hard to convince people, especially now that in this country where so much of our politics has become national and pushed out to the national level, and we've forgotten that we the people have power, and the way that we can affect change in our own personal lives is typically within our communities. We have to retrain people, and there has to be a paradigm shift that people begin to realize again that the best place that I can affect change is at home. I can affect change in my home, I can affect change in my community, and then even to some degree I can affect change in my state. But often people are so focused on what's going on in Washington, D.C., and they know that they can't affect change there. So that paradigm shift has to happen in the sense that I can't control all of these things that are in some faraway place called DC, but I can affect change at home. So how do I start there? How do I start there? Because once you start to, this again goes back to an exponential effect. Once I know that I can affect change in my home, or I can affect change in my community, I can affect change. People, once they start to gather them small wins, are more likely to continue to get involved and stay involved and do more things. So that's why we talk about civic renewal and building and rebuilding those societal breakdowns that happen, is because we feel powerless over what's happening in DC. And if we focus all of our energy on what's happening in DC, we remain powerless. If we focus back on home and and our communities and start to gather up them small wins, we start to win and we continue winning. I think it's important that people understand, Martha, that don't focus on that that's outside of your control. Start to focus on that which is in your control and start to build those wins, and that's how that paradigm shift will truly happen.
Well, I guess this next question goes to your point and also references your podcast and your interviews with others. I really like how you talk with guests about the human psyche and how we can improve ourselves. So I wanted to get your take on a behavior that seems widespread among humans, and I assume that I fall prey to as well. It's the notion that when people get together, we're typically respectful, kind, and we agree on a lot. But when we part company, we may do things that are cruel and disrespectful of others. For example, we may value family, or say we do, yet we might make a snide remark about a family member who has a different political viewpoint, or we'll go to our place of worship and listen to how we should love one another. But when we get home, we forward a social media meme that's clearly insulting to others. Have you experienced this disconnect yourself? And if so, uh, why do you think it occurs? And how can we reconcile our values with our behavior?
That's a phenomenal question, and yes, I've experienced this. I've not only have I perpetuated this kind of thing in the past, but I still see this from people I know every day, and and I think it's horrible. It's horrible for society. It's one of the dregs that has come on society with the onset of internet, this internet ecosystem that so many of us spend so much time in. There's a certain amount of anonymity that people, um, uh, and it isn't even complete anonymity, because we see people we know posting these things, but there is a courage that people have to say things online that they would not say to another person's face. Um, that may go back to the whole idea that, to say things behind some people's back is a completely different story, because if you say it to their face, you might get punched in the face, right? It's one of those ugly things that people have taken advantage of when it comes to social media and things like that. They will say things that they would never say to another person's face, and it's horrible, because I think it's ultimately far more damaging, to think that, um, people will, instead of saying how they feel and trying to work through it with somebody in person, they will go, and then instead of saying something that may have been semi reasonable if they would have said it in the context of a one-to-one in-person conversation, they now will grab onto something far uglier, uh, than than they ever would have had they been in that true face to face interaction. It is just it is a such a terrible thing, and has done immense amounts of damage to relationships. Uh, not just in our country. I think it's happened worldwide, and people are far more inclined to share things and say things online that they would never say to one another. What I would say, though, Martha, is when you see somebody post something that is clearly very ugly, and and it is clearly very ugly, and maybe not part of, or what you would believe is indicative of that person's character. just try to give them a certain amount of latitude when you see it, just because just because of that. Keep that in mind when you see that, because if I, I like you said, you used to fall prey to a lot of those those polarizing things before, and become anxiety ridden because of them, and things like that. But my thing that I would say is, have the courage. Braver Angels is in the business. Make no mistake about it. Braver Angels is in the business of courageous connections. We have to have the courage to speak with people about uncomfortable things. And those types of things, memes especially, because memes try to oversimplify things in a little tile, that only you can only fit so much in with so many words, and they are meant to be bombastic, hyperbolic, ugly, to catch people's attention and catch it quick. So they often oversimplify very complex topics with very little information, almost never sourced. It's just trash. Um, in most respects, it just is. And but like I said, when we think about people that are posting those things, just understand that it's not typically something that they would probably say to another person's face, but it caught them in a certain way. They posted it in whatever outlet they posted it, and I would say that allow your emotions to cool before you pick up the phone to call somebody. But one of the, I go back to when text messaging, and maybe some people that are listening may not remember this, but there was a time back before we all had cell phones, and even when we first got cell phones, that texting wasn't a thing. But then when texting started, uh that it was interesting, because the fastest way to misconstrue what somebody was actually trying to say was to grab it out of a text message, right? I mean, people would send a text message and try to make a point, and it would so often, I know I was very very guilty of this, that it would be misconstrued, it'd be misunderstood, your message is not conveyed, and now you've upset somebody on the other side, because they took your message different than you were trying to convey that message. I think the same thing is happening with these memes, and people think, oh, well, this is very profound, this may change somebody's mind. Just understand that you're not going to change somebody's mind with a meme. You're going to make them mad. You're going to do some damage to that existing relationship, but you're not going to change anybody's mind with a meme. It's just going to elicit some kind of emotion, and it's probably not going to be a good one.
Well, that leads to the last question that I have for you, which is um, oddly enough related to your hunting and camping. You mentioned that you really enjoy that.
Yes.
Yeah. What's a lesson you learned while experiencing nature that led you to this point of spreading the positivity you were just talking about rather than angst?
So I will tell you this, in terms of being out in nature, and keeping, you have to keep your wits about you. You have to keep cool no matter what the situation is, because especially it's not so much anymore, because communication, we've got cell phones, we've got things, we got that. But I used to, um, from a very young age, Martha, I would go spend time out in the woods, and sometimes by myself. I mean, I started camping down by the river by myself as early as probably 12 years old, which some people these days would be like, "Oh, how is that even possible? Is that even a real thing?" Yeah, it was a real thing. So I'd go spend days, a couple week or a couple days over the weekend by myself out in the woods, and with no forms of communication, and and if you didn't keep your wits about you when things did not go your way, you could get yourself into a lot of trouble and get yourself hurt and things like that. It was it was part part that brought me to my eventual notion that never allow your emotions to dictate your actions. Because when you allow your emotions to dictate your actions, quite often bad things are going to happen. Um, Same thing now is whether it be you're alone in the woods and trying to work through some particular thing, or you're having a conversation with somebody. There are so many things in this world that are going to happen outside of your control, but how we react to those things is what's really going to make the difference. Do I want to get home at the end of the day? I absolutely want to get home at the end of the day. If I allow my emotions to dictate my actions and things go sideways, um, there's a very good chance that I might not make it home as whole as I was when I left, and I want to make sure that I make it home to my family each day. Same thing is how do we keep our mind about us? How do we keep our wits about us in situations that are outside of our control in our personal interactions? It's going to be hugely important uh, for the future of our nation to say, okay, there's going to be things that I'm going to be uncomfortable with. I'm going to deal with situations outside of my control that are going to trigger me. But how do I deal with them? How do I react to them? And how do I make sure that I am personally whole at the end of the day after this particular interaction? I hope that answered your question, but that's what I think I would.
I think it's a great way to end this interview. And I would like to say thank you so much for giving us your time and attention. It's been a lovely, lovely conversation.
Thank you so much, Martha. I appreciate it.
And thanks again to those of you who listened to this episode. You can find a post and transcript of today's interview on my blog, vigilantpositivity.wordpress.com. Please join our cause.